The badge reader chirped twice and turned red. I held the card flat against it a second time, the way you do when you think the problem is your hand. Twice more. Red. 6:40 in the morning, the third Friday in November, and the back door of Fenner Tool and Die would not open for me. My phone rang while I was still standing there. My daughter, calling from inside a building I was locked out of. Dad, the building isn't yours to walk into anymore. 36 days later, I walked through that same door, and everything had changed. Before I tell you how, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever signed something for one of your kids without reading all of it, put the year you signed it. Just the year. I want to see how many of us there are. Hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear the rest, because the rest took me 41 years to be ready for. My name is Ray Ostrander. I'm 70 years old, and I spent 41 of those years as a property and casualty adjuster in Toledo, Ohio. That's the job where you drive to a stranger's house on the worst morning of their life and decide what their kitchen is worth. I've written estimates on 1,100 hail claims. I've crawled attics in August. I read a policy the way other men read a road sign, without deciding to, and I've never been able to stop. My wife, Nadine, died in October 2 years ago. She used to call what I did reading other people's worst days. Here's what I gave away, and when. In 2009, my daughter Colleen started a tool and die shop on Matzinger Road. Nadine and I put up the deposit on the building. Colleen handed me 20% of the company, and she said it the way you'd offer somebody the front seat. Just so the bank sees a second name on it, Dad. The other thing she gave me was the shop sign. Nadine picked the lettering. She stood in the parking lot with the sample board turned toward the sun for 10 minutes before she chose. The lawyer brought the operating agreement in a blue folder, maybe 60 pages. He turned it to the signature block and put his finger on the line. Colleen was talking to the bank officer about a delivery schedule. I signed it. That's the whole story. I want you to hear how ordinary it was. 41 years of reading, and the one document with my own name in it I skipped because the room was busy and my daughter was happy and it was March and it was cold. The second thing I gave her came 15 years later. Nadine's life insurance paid out $150,000 that December. Colleen came to the apartment on a Sunday with a spreadsheet, and I wrote her a check across the kitchen table. She hugged me in the doorway and she cried, and I don't believe she was performing. I've watched a lot of people cry over money. She wasn't. That February, the bank refinanced the shop's line at $400,000. Their policy requires a personal guarantee from every owner holding 20% or more. 20%. The front seat. I signed that one too. And I read every word of it, and I want to be clear about something. I knew what I was signing. I understood that if the shop went down, that number came looking for me. I did it anyway, because the sign out front had my wife's lettering on it, so that's who was standing at the back door in November. A man who'd given his daughter his wife's insurance money and his own signature, holding a badge that had gone red. Now here's the part I keep coming back to. I wasn't alone out there. Denny Roth works the 6 o'clock security shift, and he'd already waved at me through the glass before the reader chirped. 2 men from second shift setup were on the loading dock with coffee, 20 feet away, watching me hold a piece of plastic against a box on the wall. Sleet was coming down in that Toledo way, half water, and the salt on the lot had gone gray. Todd came out from the office side, my son-in-law. He didn't open the door. He stood on the other side of the glass with his hand on the frame, and he talked through it, so I got about every third word clean. Personnel file, liability, insurance carrier, at your age. I said one thing back. I asked him to open the door so we could have the conversation without a window in it. He looked at Denny. Then he shook his head, and he did something I've thought about since. He tapped the glass twice with 2 fingers, the way you'd get a fish to move, and he walked back toward the office. I stood there 4 or 5 seconds. Denny had found something to do with his clipboard. The 2 men on the dock had turned around. Then I walked to my truck across 140 feet of salted asphalt with 3 people not looking at me, and I want you to understand that the walk was the point. Anybody can change a badge code at 9 in the morning from an office. You do it at 6:40 at the back door in front of the second shift, because you want it seen. I drove to the apartment on Bancroft that I'd moved into in September. 1 bedroom. Boxes still stacked in the hall. I got Nadine's cloth tape measure out of my coat pocket, the tailor's kind. Soft. The ink worn off at 60 inches. I'd been carrying it since the move because the bedroom doorway was narrow and I hadn't decided about the dresser. I measured it again, 30.5 inches, same as the last time. Then I opened the bottom drawer of the kitchen desk and took out the blue folder from 2009. I set it on the table. I didn't open it. Not that night. They came on Thursday evening, 6 days later. Colleen let herself in with the spare key I'd given her in September, which I mention only because she knocked first anyway. 2 knocks, and then used the key before I got up from the table. Todd came in behind her, carrying a white bakery box from Wixie's on Sylvania Avenue, the place Nadine went for almond horns every Christmas Eve for 30 years. He set the box down on the kitchen table first. Then he set down a clipboard. "I want you to notice the order." I did. "We should talk about the badge thing," Colleen said. She didn't take her coat off. I know how it looked. "It looked like the badge stopped working," I said. "Dad." Then it looked like Todd tapped on the glass. Todd found something to look at over by the window. Here's what I expected. I expected her to say it was a mix-up in the personnel software. I've taken maybe 4,000 recorded statements in my career, and the thing people reach for first is almost always the accident. It was a glitch. It was the office. Nobody told me. She didn't do that. She sat down across from me and put both hands flat on the table and she said, "It wasn't a mistake. I did it." I've thought about that moment a lot since. She was better at this than I gave her credit for. When you admit the small thing fast, the person across from you spends the next 10 minutes grateful. And grateful is the softest a man ever gets. "There've been some things this year," she said. "I want to go through them with you. Not to hurt you." Then she went through them. June, I called the shop looking for Nadine's dentist appointment. Nadine had been dead 8 months. August, I left my truck running in the Kroger lot on Central for 40 minutes, with the doors locked and the spare in my pocket. October, at Gary's kid's birthday, I called Todd by the name Wendell. Wendell Pruitt is a man I worked cases with for 30 years. He is not my son-in-law, and he does not look like my son-in-law. I sat there and I checked each one against my own memory, the way I'd check a claimant's timeline against a police report. And here's the honest answer, which I'm giving you because there's no version of this where lying to you helps. 2 of the 3 were true. The dentist call was true. The birthday was true. The truck in the Kroger lot never happened, not for 40 minutes, not with the doors locked. But 2 out of 3 is a very strong number when someone is building a file, and I understood right then that I was looking at a file. Then she opened the clipboard. "I want you to see this before anybody else does," she said, and she turned a single sheet around to face me. Clinic letterhead. A cognitive screening summary, dated 5 weeks earlier. A physician's signature. A score, and next to the score, a short line of text recommending follow-up evaluation. I remembered that morning. She'd driven me over on a Tuesday and told me it was the eye appointment I'd been putting off. There'd been a clipboard at the front desk. Intake form, insurance page, a release with a line for a contact person. Her name was on the contact line in her handwriting. I'd signed all 3 without reading them. Sitting in a waiting room, holding my coat in my lap at 70 years old. You want to know what 41 years of adjusting does to a man? I looked at that paper and the first thing I felt wasn't fear. It was a kind of professional embarrassment, so complete it went almost quiet. Because a screening summary isn't a finding. It isn't a diagnosis. It isn't a court order. It can't take a driver's license, and it cannot make a man sign anything. It only has to be shown to people who love him. Under it in the clipboard was a second document. 3 pages, stapled. A withdrawal and release agreement. That's what it was and that's what it was called, and I'd read 400 of them. It withdrew me as a member of Fenner Tool and Die, released my 20%, and released every claim I had against the company and against any member of it. 2 passages were highlighted in yellow. Neither of the highlighted ones was the paragraph that mattered. "Gary's on his way to a video call," Colleen said. "He wanted to be here for this." My son's face came up on her phone, propped against the bakery box. Columbus, 32 years old, in his kitchen with the light behind him. I've been braced my whole life for people to yell at me. Nobody prepares you for gentle. Colleen showed me the note. "Dad," he said. "That's all. He didn't accuse me of anything. He didn't raise his voice or bring up the truck or the dentist. He said one sentence in the voice you use with somebody in a hospital bed, and then he said he loved me, and then he ended the call before I said a word back. The screen went dark against the bakery box, and that's when I stopped. I looked at the release for what felt like a long time. Then I moved it about 2 inches away from me, and I said that I couldn't read the small type without my glasses, and I asked whether next week would be all right. I apologized for the trouble. I thanked them for the almond horns. And my daughter, who had come into that apartment with her coat on, took her coat off and sat back down. That's the moment. If you take nothing else from this story, take that moment. She'd been ready for a fight, and I gave her a tired old man asking for a week, and her whole body changed. They stayed 20 more minutes. Todd talked about the lions. He was pleasant. He is capable of being genuinely pleasant, which I'd forgotten. When they packed up the clipboard, a sheet slipped out from under the metal clip and skated onto the floor by my chair. A photocopy. Colleen said, "Oh, that's for the bank," and I picked it up and handed it back to her. I had it in my hand about 4 seconds. Then the door closed. I didn't open the bakery box. I got a pen and the back of a utility envelope, and I wrote down the 3 things I had just seen on that photocopy. Here's what I wrote on the back of that utility envelope. 1. The coverage period started in March. In Ohio, workers' compensation doesn't come from an insurance company. It comes from the state fund, and the policy year for a private employer runs the 1st of July to the 30th of June. Always. Every private employer in this state, every year, since before I had a driver's license. You can be a good accountant and not know that. You can work at a bank for 20 years and not know it. But you cannot spend 41 years reading coverage documents in Ohio and look at a certificate that starts in March without your stomach doing something. 2. The policy number was short a suffix. 3. The business name on it was Fenner Machine, which is what the shop was called until they changed it in 2016. Somebody had built that certificate off an old one. I sat at the kitchen table with a cold bakery box in front of me, and I understood that my daughter had handed a forged coverage document to a bank. The next morning I went to the state fund's public lookup. It's free. Anyone with a phone can search any employer in Ohio by name and see whether their coverage is active. It took me under a minute. Lapsed. Effective the 28th of February. I want to sit on that for a second, because it's the closest thing to a lesson this whole story has. It cost me 4 seconds and a free website. Nobody at that bank had spent either one. Then I went looking for what the lapse had cost, and I found it in the Toledo Blade archive from June. A worker's right hand had been caught in a press at a Matzinger Road shop. No name in the article. I didn't need one. I'd been out there for the company Christmas thing in 2019 and shaken hands with a man who'd been on that press since Colleen opened the doors. Tomas Reyes. 19 years. The Lucas County docket is public too. Reyes versus Fenner Tool and Die. Filed in September. $600,000. Now, a man gets hurt at work in this state. Ordinarily, he can't sue his employer at all. Workers' comp is the whole deal. It's the trade we all made 100 years ago. He gets paid without proving anybody was careless, and in exchange he doesn't get to stand in front of a jury, unless the employer let the coverage lapse. Then the state has a name for you. Non-complying employer. When you're that, the worker can sue you directly, and you lose the defenses every other employer gets to raise. And the state fund pays his bills and then turns around and comes to collect from you, with penalties. So the lawsuit that was going to kill the shop only existed because of the choice she made in February. I drove out to Matzinger Road on the Monday. I'd found a locker key in a coat pocket, a real one, from the years I'd come out to help with inventory. Nobody stops a 70-year-old man carrying a key he's returning. Denny buzzed me through the side door and told me to take my time. The press bay hadn't changed. Concrete floor, that gray light that comes through the high windows in November, a smell of cutting oil and cold metal that I've never smelled anywhere except a shop. Number 4 press had a fresh yellow guard on it, and on the floor in front of it, about where a man would stand, there was a stain. I took Nadine's tape measure out of my coat pocket. I didn't decide to. 41 years puts things in your hands. 26 inches across at the widest, soaked into the concrete, gone dark at the center and lighter at the edges the way oil does when it sits. 5 months. Nobody had degreased that floor in 5 months, and I knew exactly why, because I'd written it in reports my whole life. You don't clean the spot. Cleaning the spot is an admission that the spot was there. I was rolling the tape back up when Colleen came into the bay. She didn't ask what I was doing. She stood about 8 feet away with her arms down at her sides, and she looked at the tape measure in my hands, and she said, "That's Mom's." I said it was. "You're measuring my floor." I told her I was returning a locker key. And then my daughter said the truest thing anybody said to me the entire time this was happening, and I'm going to give it to you the way she gave it to me, because she earned that. You know what I learned growing up in your house, Dad? I learned every claim has a number on it. East Toledo, 2011. Family of 5. Roof came apart in a windstorm. Shingles were 19 years old, and the policy said 20. You denied it, and you came home, and you ate meatloaf, and you watched the news, and you slept fine. You always slept fine. She didn't raise her voice once. So don't stand on my floor and tell me I'm the first person in this family who ever decided somebody was worth less than the paperwork said. I didn't have anything. I've had 11 months to think of what to say to that, and I still don't have anything. And if you're waiting for me to tell you she was wrong, I'm not going to. I put the tape measure back in my pocket and I drove home. And somewhere on the Anthony Wayne Trail with the wipers going, the last piece came around. I'd been assuming greed. That's the lazy read. And I'd made it about 100 times in my career and been wrong most of them. People don't usually steal because they want more. They steal because something is due on a Friday. The $150,000 I gave her went into the down payment on a second press line in January. I found that out later. It was gone by the middle of the month. February 28th, premium due and payroll due, and not enough for both. She'd chosen payroll. 26 people got paid. Then a man's hand went into a press 4 months later, and she'd spent every day since covering the first choice with a worse one. I got back to the apartment and looked at the calendar on the refrigerator. The depositions started in 10 days, which meant they needed my signature. But it didn't tell me why they needed it now. The pressure started on the Tuesday. A text from Colleen. "Dad, we need the signed pages before we leave for Chicago." Then Friday, another one. "Please. This can't wait until January." Then Todd came by the apartment alone on the 1st of December. No clipboard, no bakery box, and stood in my kitchen with his car keys in his hand, and told me that if I made Colleen do this the hard way, it was going to be the hard way for everybody. I told him I'd have an answer for them before their trip. That bought me a week, and I spent the first morning of it in a booth at the Sunrise on Detroit Avenue with Wendell Pruitt. Wendell did fraud investigations for a regional carrier for 30 years. He's 73 now, and he still eats like a man on a claims route, which is to say fast and without looking at it. I put everything on the table between the plates. The certificate, the lookup showing lapsed, the docket sheet, the release agreement. He read it the way we were both trained to, back to front. "Ray," he said, "Monday morning, you call the state. This is a forged coverage document in front of a federally insured loan. You make one phone call and you're done, and nobody can touch you after that because you're the reporter." "I know. Then why am I looking at your face?" I told him to turn to the last page of the docket sheet, where the plaintiff's damages were itemized. Wendell put his fork down and read it, and I watched him get there on his own, which is what I'd driven out for. I needed somebody else to say it so I'd know I hadn't talked myself into something. "Ah, hell," he said. "Here it is. If I turn her in, the shop is gone inside 6 weeks. The bank calls the note the same day the story gets out. 26 people are laid off before the end of January. And Tomas Reyes, who has a judgment coming and no hand, gets in line with everybody else the shop owes. Unsecured creditor. In a liquidation like that, he'd see somewhere around 4 cents on the dollar. The only way there is money for that man is if the shop is still running when the judgment comes down. So the two things I wanted, punishing what she did and paying what she owed, sat on opposite ends of the same board. I could have one. "You still get burned either way," Wendell said. "You're the guarantor. Shop dies, that 400,000 comes and finds you. I know that too." "Do you?" He pulled the release agreement over and turned it around and put his thumb halfway down the second page. "Then read your paragraph 9 again." I'd read paragraph 9. I'd read it 4 times, and I'd read it as a man reading about himself, which is the one condition under which I am no better at this than anybody else. The highlighted parts released my 20%. Paragraph 9, not highlighted, released every claim I had against the company and against any member of it, arising from any capacity, including as guarantor. A guarantor who pays has a right to turn around and collect from the people he paid for. That's the whole point of the thing. It's called subrogation, and I have spent my working life on the sending end of it. Paragraph 9 took that away. So they didn't want me out of the company. Out was free. They wanted me standing underneath it when it came down, holding $400,000, with no one left to ask. Wendell said something about how he'd have caught it in 10 seconds on somebody else's file. I said I knew. We didn't say much after that. He paid for both breakfasts and told me not to argue about it. I drove home and I sat down on the bedroom floor of that apartment, with my back against the boxes I still hadn't unpacked, and I fell apart. Not about Colleen. I want to be accurate about this, because I'd been telling myself for 3 weeks that I was grieving my daughter, and I wasn't. I was grieving my wife, and I'd been putting it off since October of the year before because there had been things to sign. Nadine read the obituaries out loud every Sunday morning. Not the famous ones. The 4-line ones for people nobody wrote much about. And she'd get to the end and say something about them. One sentence, like she was making sure somebody had. She had a laugh that started before the funny part. She could not parallel park. 42 years. The last thing she ever said to me was a question about whether it was supposed to rain. I told her Thursday. She said good, and then she went to sleep, and that was it. That was the last of it. A question about the weather, and a man saying Thursday. I sat on that floor for a long time. There's nothing after this. I'm not going to turn it into anything. The next morning I got up and opened the blue folder. March 2009. 61 pages. I read all of it, every line, the way I should have the first time, and it took me until 2 in the afternoon. Section 5.2. A manager can be removed by vote of a majority of the membership interests. Section 7.4. No member may transfer any interest to a non-member without first offering it to the existing members in writing. 30 days. And then the sentence that whoever drafted this put in, and nobody ever thought about again. Any transfer made in violation of this section is void, and the non-transferring member may acquire the offered interest on the same terms extended to the outside party. I read it 3 times. Then I called Wendell and asked him to pull the state's public filing index on Fenner Tool and Die, because he still has better search habits than I do. He called back in 20 minutes. November 19th. 5 days after they changed my badge code, Colleen had sold 55% of the company to a private lending outfit in Cleveland to fund the mediation. No letter had ever come to me. Not certified, not regular mail, not an email, nothing. Which meant the 30 days had never started. I got a pencil and did the arithmetic on the back of the same utility envelope, and the number was smaller than I'd braced for, and I sat in that kitchen at 70 years old and understood that for the first time since the badge went red, the paperwork was standing on my side of the table. They left for Chicago on the 8th of December. I want to explain why that mattered, because it wasn't distance. Toledo to Chicago is 4 hours in one time zone, and a phone works fine in Illinois. The press manufacturer is in Illinois, and the plaintiff's lawyer had brought them in as a third defendant, which was the only good news Colleen had gotten all year. If the machine was defective, the money lands somewhere else. So there were 6 days of depositions at a law office on Wacker Drive. Design engineer, records custodian, 2 maintenance techs who'd left the company in 2022. Colleen and Todd were both named individually. Both had to sit through all of it, plus 3 more days with their own attorney and the mediator. 9 days. And their lawyer had told them the thing every defense lawyer tells a client at that stage. Don't put anything in writing about this case or this company. Not a text, not an email, not a note to yourself. Anything you write, the other side gets. They were scared enough to actually do it. So for 9 days my daughter could not write one sentence about the company she owned. Here's what I did with them. First, I found the lawyer who drafted the operating agreement in 2009. Same firm, downtown. A man named Art Dellinger who is 68 and works Tuesdays and Thursdays now. I put the page in front of him and asked whether Section 7.4 meant what I thought it meant. He read it, and he sat back and he said, I wrote that clause. In 16 years, nobody has ever called me about it. Then he said something I've kept. He said most protective language in these documents is written for a fight nobody ever has, and it just sits there getting older. And then once in a great while, somebody opens the drawer. Second, the money. I need you to see this part, because I've watched a lot of these stories, and everybody skips it. The Cleveland lender had paid $191,000 for 55%. Under 7.4, I had to match their terms exactly. Not a discount, not book value, the same number. I had $150,000 14 months earlier, and I'd handed it to my daughter across a kitchen table. So, I emptied the 401k and the IRA, $190,000 gross. At 70, there's no early withdrawal penalty. I was past that a long time ago, but it's all ordinary income in a single tax year, and it moved me up a bracket, and what came out the other side was about $142,000. I sold the truck. The F-150, 91,000 miles, $26,000 to a dealer on Alexis Road who did not have to work very hard on me. There was a small annuity Nadine had set up in the 90s and never talked about, $21,000. That's $189,000. I was $2,000 short. I sat in Art Dellinger's waiting room and did it 4 times on my phone, hoping arithmetic would change its mind. Then I called Wendell and told him where I was, and he asked me for the account information and hung up before I finished the second sentence. The money was there that afternoon. He has never let me pay him back, and we have stopped discussing it. Third, the letters. Certified mail, return receipt, on the 5th of December. Not to the shop. Anybody can open mail at a shop. I sent them to the company's registered agent, which is public information on the Secretary of State's website, and to the lender's office in Cleveland. I kept the green receipts in a paper clip in my coat pocket. 41 years of documenting other people's losses, and I'd never once had a file of my own. And fourth, and this is the part I'd take back if I could take anything back, I went out to the shop twice while they were gone. I brought a bakery box the first time. I asked the receptionist, a young woman named Priya who has been there 3 years, about the holiday schedule, and then I asked her again about 11 minutes later. I called her Denise, which is the name of the woman who had that desk before her. I left my reading glasses on her counter and came back in for them. And every time I did one of those things, I walked out with a number I needed. Who was covering payroll while Colleen was gone? When the bank's quarterly package was due? Whether the Cleveland people had ever set foot in the building? Now here's the trouble. On the 12th, the state fund called the shop back. Somebody in their office was following up on the coverage inquiry I'd made, checking who had asked. Todd had come home a day early. He picked up the phone at the front counter, and I was standing 10 feet away with my glasses in my hand. I heard him say, "An inquiry from who?" So I did the only thing I had. I walked up and reached for the phone and said that would be mine. I'd been trying to sort out my own coverage, and I must have given them the wrong number, and I'm sorry, Wendell, I'm sorry. I called my son-in-law Wendell, standing 3 feet in front of him, and I watched him decide it was the funniest thing that had happened to him all week. He handed me the phone, and in the 30 seconds I had it, I asked the woman on the other end to confirm one date for me, and she gave me the 28th of February, which was the last piece I was missing. Then Todd took the phone back, hung it up for me, and said to Priya, right in front of me, that somebody needs to have a conversation about him driving. Here's the part I said I'd take back. Every one of those performances gave them a fresh piece of evidence. I was building their file for them while I was building mine. Art Dellinger would have told me to stop if I'd asked him, and I didn't ask him. And I sat in the parking lot afterward, and I'll be honest with you the way I've tried to be honest the whole way through. I don't know that I could have played it that well if I weren't afraid it might be true someday. That's all I'm going to say about that. On the 15th, the Cleveland Lenders Council called Art. They weren't going to fight a void transfer over a shop in this condition. They took the money, assigned the interest, signed a release, and were gone by the end of the day. Monday morning, I owned 75% of Fenner Tool & Die. Todd called me that afternoon, and I have never heard him happier. They were opening the leased bay across the lot on Saturday. Bank people, customers, the Blade sending somebody. He wanted to know if I'd come. He said they wanted a family photo for the paper. I told him I'd be there. I ordered the sign on the 17th. Same company Colleen had used, out on Airport Highway. I called and said I was the new managing member of Fenner Tool & Die, that there'd been a change we needed reflected before Saturday, and that I'd cover the balance on the order. The woman asked me to email the corrected copy. I asked whether the artwork from 2009 was still in their system. It was. Top line, the shop's name. Bottom line, where the old one said Colleen Fenner, President, it now said R. Ostrander, Managing Member. In my wife's lettering, the one she stood in a parking lot and picked out with the sample board turned toward the sun. They hung it Friday afternoon and covered it with a white drop cloth tied off with a pull cord, exactly the way the order specified, because that's what Colleen had asked for back in October. Saturday, the 20th of December, 10 in the morning, 34 degrees, that flat Toledo gray that doesn't change all day. About 40 people in the leased bay across the lot. 2 from the bank, a reporter from the Blade with a notebook, 6 or 7 customers, most of the shop, folding tables with a tray of sandwich rolls and coffee in 2 plastic air pots. I came in 10 minutes late. No cane. I'd been carrying one since the first week of November, and I had never needed it a day in my life. Gray suit. I'd shaved twice, and instead of a bakery box, I had a hard-sided document case under my arm, the one I carried to depositions for 20 years. There were chairs down front where the family sits. I didn't go to them. I stood at the back with the 2 men from the bank, and one of them shook my hand and asked how retirement was treating me. Colleen spoke for 3 minutes. She was good. She talked about her mother, and about a hard year, and about a shop that had been on Matzinger Road for 16 years and wasn't going anywhere. People clapped in the right places. She found me at the back once and gave me a small smile, and I want to be fair to her here, because that smile was real. She was glad I'd come. She thought the release was signed and sitting in her attorney's inbox in Chicago, and she'd stopped thinking about me entirely, which is the exact condition I'd spent 9 days building. Todd stood next to the ribbon with a pair of those oversized scissors. Then Colleen took the pull cord in her hand and thanked everybody for coming, and she pulled it. The cloth came down in one piece and folded on the concrete, and the creases stayed in it. Nobody said anything. I've been in a lot of rooms when the number came out wrong. Kitchen tables, hospital hallways, an insurance conference once when the market turned. There's a specific quiet. It isn't shock. It's 40 people simultaneously deciding not to be the first one to react. 4 seconds. Then somebody near the coffee said, "Huh," and somebody else laughed, the half laugh you use when you assume it's a joke, and Colleen was still holding the cord. She looked at the sign for a long time. Then she looked for me at the back. I walked up the middle of that bay to the signing table they'd set up with the white cloth on it. It's about 60 feet. My knee is not what it was, and I made sure it didn't show. And I'm not proud of that, but I'm not going to lie about it either. I opened the case and I put down 3 pieces of paper, in order, and I did not say one word while I did it. First, the notarized written consent of the members, dated the 15th, showing the assignment from the Cleveland lender and the resulting ownership. 75-25. Second, the certified mail receipt from the 5th of December, the green card, signed for at her own company's registered agent, on a date 2 weeks before she stood up to give that speech. Third, the state funds coverage history for Fenner Tool and Die. 1 page. The word lapsed and the date, the 28th of February. The banker who'd asked about retirement leaned over the table and read them left to right, and then he went back and read the third one twice. Then I put Nadine's tape measure down on the corner of the table. I don't have a good reason for that. I'd been carrying it in my coat since September, and it belonged at that table more than I did. And then I picked up the pen and said the first thing I'd said to anybody in that room. The coverage year in Ohio starts in July. That's it. 12 words. Not one person in that bay understood what it meant except one, and she was standing 40 feet away with a pull cord in her hand, and I watched my daughter's face come apart over a sentence about a fiscal calendar, because she knew what I'd seen. She knew exactly how long I'd known. And she knew the paper she'd handed the bank in October was sitting under a piece of glass on a table in front of 2 of their employees. The reporter came forward with her phone out and asked me to say my name. The banker didn't ask anybody anything. He picked up his coffee, set it back down without drinking it, and walked outside into the cold with his phone against his ear, and through the bay door I could see him standing in the lot in his shirt sleeves, talking. Todd was still holding the scissors. He hadn't moved since the cloth came down. He had them in both hands, blades apart, the ribbon still strung across the doorway behind him, and he was looking at the sign, and then at the table, and then at his wife, and back. Somebody had started rolling up the drop cloth. Somebody else turned off the little speaker that had been playing music nobody had noticed until it stopped. And Colleen finally let go of the cord and started walking toward the table. Todd broke first, and he broke loud. He set the scissors down on a folding table and said, to the room, not to me, that he had never seen that certificate before, that he wasn't involved in the insurance, that Colleen handled the insurance. He said it twice. She handled the insurance. The second time he said it, the reporter wrote it down, and he watched her write it down, and he did not stop talking. His wife was 8 feet away, and he never once turned his head toward her. Colleen didn't do that. I'll give her this, and then I'll be done giving her things. She stood in front of 40 people, and she did not deny one word of it. She came to the table and she got close enough that only I could hear her. And she said, there are 26 people on that floor, Dad. You just killed a company with 26 people on it. And I said the only thing I'd been carrying all week. 26. And a 27th who doesn't have a right hand. She stopped. My phone went off while she was still standing there. Gary, in Columbus. Somebody at that opening had already put a photograph of the sign on the internet. 20 minutes. That's all it took. He said, Dad, I didn't know. And I believed him. That's the part I'd change if I could change any of it. Todd was covering himself, and Colleen was fighting, and both of those I understood. But my son had looked at one piece of paper about his father, and never asked a second question, and he hadn't done it out of malice. He'd done it because it was easier. I have forgiven him for it, and I have not forgotten it, and those are two different jobs. They cleared the bay out by noon. Nobody cut the ribbon. It was still strung across that doorway in January. Colleen found me in the break room while I was waiting for Art Dellinger to bring the car around. She didn't ask for the company. She didn't ask for money. She asked me not to file with the state. That's all she wanted. Don't report the certificate. She said she'd sign anything, leave, never contact me, whatever I wanted, just don't make that call. And I told her the truth, which was that I'd spent 41 years reading the worst days of people I'd never met and writing down what they were owed, and not once in 41 years had anybody let me decide that somebody I loved should be written down differently. I said I wasn't going to start at 70. She said, that's not an answer, that's a speech. She was right about that too. So I gave her the answer. I said no. That was the last full conversation I have had with my daughter. Now the short version of what came after, because the rest of it is paperwork and I've put you through enough of that. The bank moved the note to the new managing member inside 10 days. They were relieved. A bank would always rather have a guarantor who returns calls. Colleen was removed as manager on the 26th of December under Section 5.2 by a vote of 75% of the membership, which is a sentence that means I did it alone in a lawyer's office on a Friday. Todd moved to a townhouse in Perrysburg in February. They're still married as far as I know. The state opened its file on the certificate in February. I wasn't in the room for any of that, and I don't have a dramatic ending to give you. These things take years and they end in letters. Here's the part I actually care about. The first thing I did as an owner, before the bank paperwork, before anything, was call Tomas Rea's attorney and make an offer. We settled in January. Structured, paid out of shop cash flow over 3 years, which is not what a jury would have given him and is considerably more than 4 cents on the dollar. I also filed the late report with the state fund and told them the truth about the 28th of February, in writing, in a document with my signature on it. You should understand what that document is. It's an admission by the company I now own, and I signed it knowing that every penalty that comes out of it comes out of my end. That's the part that made it real. Anybody can report their daughter. It costs something to report the company you just bought. I met him at his lawyer's office to sign. He shook my hand with his left, which he's had 11 months to get good at, and has. He asked me why I did it. I told him his floor still had the stain on it, and somebody should have measured it in June. The shop is still running. 26 people, minus Colleen, plus a scheduler we hired in March. In June, I handed the managing member seat to Ellis Barnhart, who has run that floor for 14 years, and who understands the work in a way I never will. I kept Nadine's 20%. I kept nothing else. And then I drove home. I sit in that kitchen on Bancroft most evenings. The tape measure is on the table. Last week I measured the space between the window and the corner because I've been thinking about a chair, and I got 38 inches, and then I sat there a while with my hand on it. Here's what I've got. And it isn't about trusting your children. I read 400 of those releases in my career. I could find the bad paragraph in a stranger's document in 90 seconds, and I did it for 4 decades, and I was good at it, and I slept fine. The one document with my own name on it, I signed on a cold morning in March because my daughter was happy and the room was busy. Everything that happened to me happened in the 9 seconds I didn't spend reading. And the thing that saved me was a clause a tired lawyer wrote in 2009 for a fight he assumed would never come, sitting in a drawer for 16 years, waiting for somebody to open it. So that's the whole lesson, and it's a small one. Read the thing with your name on it, especially when you love the person handing it to you. Especially then. I still have Colleen's number in my phone. I never blocked it. I've never called it either. So tell me, what did you sign without reading, and what year was it? I asked you back at the beginning, and I meant it. Put it in the comments, and if you stayed with an old adjuster for the whole thing, you have my thanks. Subscribe if you want the next one.